everyone, I'm Michelle Svenson from the programming team, and I'm here with Director Katya Soldak to talk about her film, The Long Breakup. Katya Soldak is a Ukrainian-American journalist based out of New York and is the editorial director of Forbes Media International Edition. The Long Breakup marks her debut as a film director. Hello, Katya. Thank you so much for sharing your film with us and taking the time to discuss the film. I do wonder, where are you joining us from today?
Hi, thank you for having this conversation with me. I am in Brooklyn, New York right now.
Have you been back since the recent war has started?
Back where?
To the Ukraine, to Kharkiv? Or?
No, I'm not in Ukraine, or I'm not going to Ukraine because the war started about 6 weeks ago. Today is April 8th. And my place is in New York, in America, where I offer the film for people to watch and conversations around Ukraine. And it just happened that my expertise on Ukraine and knowledge of the situation became needed here. So I am here.
Yeah, we are very appreciative. I think your film is very timely. I know it's been timely for many years now, but particularly so now. I do want to offer my condolences for the situation in Ukraine, and I hope your family and friends are safe. I guess there's so many questions. Yes. One, again, in appreciation of your film, not only was it really educational, and I think maybe for people like me who might have assumed that everyone in the Ukraine has always wanted independence. And I think your film had taught us that wasn't always the case, and that the title is so appropriate, right? The Long Breakup, and kind of that evolution of ideas and changes and different people's hearts and minds. Since the final cut of your film, have you seen even more shifts in people's thoughts, particularly your friends in the film, who I know that you kind of politically grew apart?
Yeah, I mean, the question of independence, it's a very interesting question because the process did not happen overnight. And I was fortunate to document that transition in Ukrainians, especially in that part of Ukraine that was traditionally very close to Russia and just indifferent. But the shift was really over among Ukrainians. By the time I finished filming, the film was finished in 2020, at the end of 2020, and the Maidan Revolution happened in 2014, and Russia invaded Ukraine 8 years ago and annexed Crimean territories, and that was basically what prompted a lot of people who were sort of on the fence. They didn't care too much about politics, to realize that they are Ukrainian patriots, and then they don't want to be associated with Russia. So it happened 8 years ago, and my film is showing that. But now when we're talking about this, the war in Ukraine made everything even more clear to people who were considering themselves Ukrainians, but still kind of had a lot of more or less peaceful attitude towards Russia. That is over by now. And I wish my film was not so needed right now and nobody wanted to watch it, but unfortunately it's as relevant as ever, except that this particular war that is happening now is beyond anybody's expectations, and no one could imagine that. And even I, with all my journalistic background and following closely all the developments, I am just shocked by the scale of this war and Russia's hostility towards Ukraine that does not leave any room for anyone in Ukraine, at least at the moment, to think about some reconciliation or friendly relationship. Just as we speak, Russia started committing what I would not describe anything else other than genocide and systematic killing of Ukrainians, civilian population. When I was making that film, no one could imagine that. We knew that Russia invaded, we knew that Russia annexed territories, broke the international law, and that was shocking, just the way it was. But to imagine that Russians would come into Ukrainian cities, especially, it doesn't even matter if they are Russian friendly or not friendly, just civilian populations of cities, of towns where people live. There are no military bases, there are no warehouses, just hospitals, schools, residential areas, and they would start killing people and children and torturing them. I don't know how much, an average person is following what's happening, but we don't see in mainstream news even a fraction of what is happening, partially because there are certain rules about exposing certain violent content in mainstream media, and partially because AP or Reuters photographers are not taking those pictures and they're not going into the databases that mainstream media is using. But what I see from people on the ground, very reliable sources, basically people who were there or their friends or family, there are like children killed and tortured in small rooms, or there are women who are raped and killed in front of their children's eyes. The idea of independence, it was always there. Ukraine is an independent country and wanted to be an independent country. It's strange to expect 40 million population, or at that time when Ukraine was declaring independence, it was almost 50 million population, to expect them to be in unison and to have these, very aggressive or very active ideas about independence, because people are people. All they want to do, just want to live, go to work, raise their children. Not everybody is an activist, not everybody is politically active or conscious, but over 30 years, one way or the other, the nation was formed into an independent country, very different from Russia, very different from the Soviet Union. And what I witnessed right now is Russia's policy. It is not an accidental thing that hundreds of Russian soldiers are coming to Ukraine and killing civilian population. That's hatred, that's basically orders, that's just human factor. I don't know exactly what it is, but it is authorized and it is encouraged. And other than genocide, I cannot call it anything else. And we talk about war crimes. We started talking about war crimes maybe a couple of weeks ago. They're only growing in scale. And this is the scariest part. We're not talking about like civil idea of countries' independence. We're talking about one government authorizing and sponsoring and basically sanctioning the killing of another nation. And what I want to add, I'm sorry that I'm speaking nonstop, but I don't know exactly where to, find an angle that would let me stop talking about it, because the information that keeps coming, it's just horrific. And a lot of information is still in Russian or in Ukrainian, so it's not easy to always communicate it to a Western viewer. But for instance, the head of Moscow church, who's supposed to be a holy, person, whatever his title in English is, Russian Orthodox Church, he basically broadcasts a message to all the faithful people who go to his church and part of that church, that Ukraine is not a nation, that we need to kill Ukrainians, and we all are Russian people, and those who are not Russian needs to be killed. This is a very big and powerful message to the population of Russia. Then one of the major Russian news agencies, RIA agency, posts a whole manifesto about killing Ukrainians. It's not somebody crazy, marginal, group of society. This is a state news agency that writes a few pages where they describe that anybody who is Ukrainian should be killed, exterminated, and only people who are Russians should be left. Whatever wording they're using, that's basically what the message is. And this is horrific. This is beyond anything that, you know, in 21st century should be happening. And yet it is happening.
Katya, speaking to that, I do wonder because, you know, one of the things that some people say or advise that maybe the best outcome of this war is if it's won from the inside out of Russia itself, that if it came from the Russian people, but that I worry, and I think many people worry, yes, that there's been an outlaw of sharing what Russia is calling false news, which could merely be just receiving the information, right? And that they're saying that the Russian government is not only has the capability to see people's social media accounts, but they are actively looking at them and flagging people and arresting people. What do you think the best way to get this information to the Russian people, and do you believe that? Do you think that that is the best case scenario to win this war?
I don't want to sound like a pessimist, but I think at this point, this is not an option. I think that the way that machine is working, that the government is set up, it's too late to expect that somehow people will change from the country, or the regime will change from within. 10 years ago, Russia put a lot of serious efforts into controlling the information space, even 20 years ago, but more so since 2011, when Vladimir Putin was re-elected, or he re-elected himself. And a lot of people went out into the streets and protested. Bolotnaya Square, that's the name of the protests that happened in 2011. And then the government arrested people for big and small things and put them to prison and jail, and basically tightened the screws. And a lot of people realized that they either will have to go to jail and prison if they protest, or they have to leave the country. And gradually people started leaving. And then also Russian government put a lot of effort into eliminating any opposition or opposition leaders, including Navalny, who is in prison, and killing people like Nemtsov, who was potentially one of the leaders, and then poisoning people and, you know, killing journalists, doctors. Anyway, it didn't happen overnight. They arrived to the place where they are now through years of gradual oppressions and changes. And even the recent change a month ago, when the journalists can go to prison for calling the war as opposed to special operation for 15 years, basically killing any independent media, any freedom of speech, and then gradually closing social media accounts and amplifying national television channels, national radio, anything that gives the message that Ukrainians are Nazis, that the United States, the Department of Defense of the United States is financing some chemical or biological labs to develop weapons. These kinds of messages, you know, they're just going into people's heads, and there's not much one can do. I know of cases in my own family or in my friends' families when there is a mother, for instance, in Russia, or not even in Russia, just watching Russian television in America, who believes Russian television, and her own daughter, who is in Ukraine, who tells her, we're getting killed, we're getting shelled, and we are not Nazis. And the mother that is brainwashed by the Russian television, she would say, you're exaggerating. That's not the case. If we didn't attack you, then you would have attacked us. You are Nazis. It's a common place. It's not one isolated incident. It's something that's the result of propaganda and brainwashing. And it's probably very similar. I'm not an expert on North Korea, but it is somewhat closer to that. I think the change, it happened a few weeks ago, months ago, but it was prepared gradually for years. And I don't think that there is anyone in Russia right now who can rise up and just start changing the regime from within. They put a lot of effort into becoming the police state, and unless economically something happens, but it also needs to happen. Right now, it's not happening. When people, like, the quality of life goes so low that people just literally become hungry and uncontrollable. But I wouldn't expect any kind of revolution. I hope I'm wrong, but there is nothing that gives me hope that it is possible inside of Russia right now.
What do you think that people can do, people in the West can do, particularly about these war crimes? I've seen, petitions go out, but what can those petitions do?
Well, what the West can do and should do, in 1994, there was a Budapest memorandum that promised Ukraine to guarantee its sovereignty and independence when Ukraine gave up nuclear arms. And when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, nothing was done to protect Ukraine. Russia, one of the guarantors, was the invader. And then the United States and the UK did not do anything to help. So the moment was kind of missed, but maybe it's not too late to properly support Ukraine in its fight. And we understand that no one wants to send their troops to Ukraine, but Ukraine has troops so far. There are soldiers, there are officers, there are people who want to fight. They just don't have enough weapons, they don't have enough support. They're fighting the best they can, and they're showing some tremendous strength and also skill too. I'm not, again, a military expert in any way, but we all kind of become in one or try to understand what's happening. And from what I see, that Ukrainian army is much stronger than anybody in the West expected it to be, and they can handle serious military equipment, and they should be given enough equipment and enough weapons to fight Russia. What else? Sanctions should be stronger. Right now, there are still plenty of countries that are dealing with Russia, also selling and buying things with Russia, and energy, oil, still sold by Russia to Western countries. In fact, from my conversations with business journalists who deal with Russia and write about Russia, they report that Russia is doing actually quite well. I know it's not something that easy to understand, but economically, they're making a lot more money on the energy and oil sales than before. So something needs to be done in that regard. I would say sanctions, weapons, and continuing support of Ukraine. But unfortunately, and I don't like saying things like this, but unless the current Russian regime is gone, there is never going to be any peace, neither for Ukraine, nor for Europe, nor for America. We can only guess how far Putin's appetites are going, but people should be mindful that this conflict, you might think that it's only about Ukraine, but it's not about Ukraine. It's only the matter of years or months or years. I don't know, Putin waited for 8 years to start this sort of war after he invaded Ukraine for the first time. You might think that maybe there is a break or some kind of a peace, but as long as this regime is alive, no one is safe, unfortunately.
Some people fear, and people like myself, even who do remember the Cold War and growing up with the fear of nuclear threat, that if the United States gets involved too deeply in accordance to whatever that means in Putin's eyes, that he will escalate the war to potentially nuclear war.
It's a very common way to say it, but the thing is that everybody is already involved. And plus, it doesn't matter what we in the West say or do. Putin is going to do what he's going to do. You might think that there's some kind of fine line that the Western government, the United States or European countries should not cross, but it doesn't matter. He would still push and push whatever according to his agenda. I would say that appeasing Putin is not going to bring peace. So yes, you know, I know this is the message that the government is giving, but
So you think that regardless, no matter what level, if Putin decides to employ nuclear weapons, he's just going to do it, and it's most likely because he's losing.
I don't want to say anything like that because I don't want to, you know, create any panic or say messages that can be misinterpreted. But I think there is a very strong history that's showing that it doesn't matter what reset the United States is doing with Putin, or how careful the Western countries and the NATO are. Russia does things their own way. They disregard the law and any kind of arrangements or agreements. And if they decide to do something, they will do it. It's just the hope is that we all live on one planet and we want to live on that planet, and they all have children, grandchildren, who knows? I don't know what they're thinking, but I don't think it's just limited to Ukraine.
Well, this, I would say, you know, interviewing you today is, you know, quite different from some of the other interviews with the other films, because we have something very, you know, it's very urgent in the moment and something that nobody knows what the outcome is going to be. So it's kind of hard to ask, you know, in terms of what you think the next steps are for you as both a filmmaker and as a journalist. But feel free to speak on that if you have any thoughts. But one question I kind of did have is about, again, it's about the propaganda and false news, or the claiming of false news, and you know, and also with the perfecting. I would like to say that in the present tense, that it's still happening, perfecting kind of like that deep fake technology of using people's likenesses and voices. Right now, we see it more predominantly in fiction films, but you know, who's to say that that's not right around the corner in terms of news? So, how do you see the future of news and the future of journalism in this kind of climate?
Well, obviously, we're going to continue having social media where people report right away whatever they see, whatever they hear, and it's good to have those photos and tweets and information, but it can be misinterpreted, it can be misused, it can be manipulated, and the future still will have credible news outlets that are reporting information that's been fact-checked, that's been you know, verified, sources that are verified, and that's not going to go away. It's complicated because people, you know, can go anywhere, especially with all the algorithms. You get stuck in the bubble and you don't get to see what's outside of your bubble. And if somebody wants to stay informed, I think, okay, once in a while people should make an effort and just see what the other bubble is saying, just to hear what they're saying, but also be mindful that some outlets are not just a point of view. Some outlets are propaganda, whether it's Russian or some other countries that are pushing their own agenda. So the source of information will remain extremely important when people are looking at what they're looking. But again, it's very easy to get stuck in what's comfortable and only see information that's fed to you by algorithms. And once in a while, it is important to kind of venture out and try to see some other perspectives. That's important. And as to the film, I think that you know, I've been asked often if I'm going to do a sequel or any update on the characters from the film. I would say that with characters, it's kind of very simple. They all got affected by the war. My family ended up in the United States right now, but they're not happy. They don't want to be here every day. They just want to go back. But since the situation is far from getting better, they understand that they should be here, but it's very heartbreaking, and there's nothing good about that visit. It's all about the war and trying to stay sort of in some decent moral spirit. And the characters from the film who are not my family, they're all over the place. Somebody evacuated, ran, not knowing where, ended up God knows where with no resources. Somebody stayed because they had elderly family members who couldn't leave, so they were torn between the future of the children and taking care of older people in the family, and they got stuck. And right now, when I read the accounts of people who were in the occupied towns and cities, and most of them are dead, I naturally worry about these people who I know. But again, it's not just people I know, it's everybody. It's 40 million people. It's the whole country that's, under attack and risking their lives. So thinking about any kind of sequel is at this moment not my first priority. I understand that it would make sense, and I even mentioned that to my stepfather and my mother, but I cannot act on it. I tried to do some filming with the phone, and it just seems like violating for me of any ethics right now. It just doesn't seem right. But I know that there are people in Ukraine and Kharkiv and all the very, very difficult, hard, dangerous areas who are working on documentary films, and those are going to be different films that are going to be really hard to watch. But hopefully they will make those films and the world will see what's happening.
Are there any ways we can help support those documentary filmmakers in Ukraine now?
I honestly don't know. I don't know how. I know people try to support Ukraine, and that would be one of the ways, supporting by monetary contribution, by some medical supplies, supporting refugees, supporting displaced people. At this point, I think it's not even easy to say how to get that help through the border to Ukraine. So maybe after, when people get out and start doing some post-production, that would be a good moment to help with funds. Right now, it's like, it's a war zone, and we don't know who's there, and we don't know who's gonna make out alive.
Thank you so much for your time today. And if you do think of any particularly trusted sources to recommend to any of our audiences, please do send them our way, and we'll be sure to post them. I really appreciate your film, the education. I think it's really important for not just Americans, but for the world to see what's really been happening and the evolution of that to where we got to today. And hopefully we can all make some positive change and helping in this war, and that everyone can start rebuilding their lives again in Ukraine. Thank you so much, Katya.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for talking about the film and for watching the film. I know it gives context to people who maybe are not completely immersed into that, just like I am and some of my friends. But I know that it gives, an overview of 30 years of life in independent Ukraine, and it helps people understand the current situation. And someday it's going to be not just about Ukraine. There will be another post-Soviet country that might happen in the news. And if my film helps understanding that world a little bit better, I'm very happy and grateful. So thank you for letting me share the story about Ukraine.
Thank you.